I think I just want to recognize that wild pigs are an invasive species. They don't belong on our landscape. And so we don't want to encourage people to either farm them or raise them for hunt purposes. They just don't belong here. Um, I think from the experiences that we've seen, especially in the southern states, um, you need to take control measures very quickly and very aggressively. If you wait until a problem starts to get large, then you're way behind. It's been estimated that you have to remove up to 70% of a pig population in order just to maintain it at the same level. So that number sticks in my head as we really have to get after this. And then the last point that I would make is that building that coalition of stakeholders, so not just government agencies, but non-government agencies, producer groups, wildlife groups, environmental groups. You have to bring all of those folks into the same umbrella, if you will, to focus on this one issue. And everybody can play a part. And it's not going to be solved by one group doing one thing.
Well, welcome to SwineNet Canada podcast. My name is John Patience, and I'll be the host for today's podcast. And with us today, we have Dr. Wayne Lease, who will be talking to us about a One Health approach to managing the wild pig population. Good day, Wayne. How are you today?
Doing very well, thanks, John.
Great. Wayne, before we get started, I know you're well known in a number of, looking at your background, in a number of different circles in Western Canada, but there may be some of our listeners that may not be familiar with who you are and your background. So if you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes and where Wayne got started and how you ended up being where you are today.
Okay, it's a long story, and I'll cut it short for the sake of the listeners. But I'm a veterinarian. Graduated from University of Saskatchewan and did a master's degree at the University of Guelph, the Ontario Veterinary College, in veterinary epidemiology. So I've worked in private practice. I've worked in government circles, both at the provincial and federal level, and now I'm working actually in a project to control wild pigs in Manitoba.
Right on. And there's a number of aspects of this that as I was reading the background notes you prepared for me, thank you very much, that I think might bring some new concepts to our listeners. And the first one is the One Health approach. So if you wouldn't mind, Wayne, maybe help our listeners to understand what exactly is meant by this One Health approach.
Well, One Health is a term that was introduced a number of decades ago, but it hasn't really caught on in terms of general knowledge. But I look at One Health as an intersection of issues that affect animal health. It affects environmental health, and it can affect human health. So where those three things intersect, that will be called a One Health problem. And the problem with wild pigs actually fits right in that intersection.
Okay. And so that's a nice way to segue into the topic about wild pigs. And why is it such an issue, Wayne? Why should we be worried about a population of wild pigs?
Well, let me just start then with the environmental impacts of wild pigs. They're an introduced species. They're not native to North America. And they do a lot of damage in the environment through their rooting behaviors, through their omnivorous appetites. So they can eat anything, basically, that they find including small mammals and reptiles and endangered species. Their rooting behavior destroys the environment locally, as well as destroying crops. They especially like things like standing corn or potatoes or any of those types of things. And when you look at a pasture that wild pigs have been in, it looks like a rototiller went through it. It's pretty dramatic. From the animal health point of view, they're a significant threat because they can carry all the diseases that domestic pigs have, such as PED or PRRS. But the biggest issue that I think most swine producers are worried about is their ability to carry foreign animal diseases should they ever be introduced into this country. So they could carry things like foot and mouth disease. They could also carry African swine fever, which is a major, major worry for swine producers. And then finally, their human health issues. These are not nice creatures. They're pretty aggressive, and so there are human safety factors. If these animals are ever cornered or threatened in any way, they will charge and have very long tusks. And there have been reports of people being injured with wild pigs.
Right, you bet. And to clarify, Wayne, so the issue with wild pigs is certainly a health and biosecurity issue as it relates to the Canadian pig population, domestic pig population, but they do not represent a disease risk. Now, you mentioned the health issues related to their living in the wild and the effect on humans, but they do not represent a health risk to humans. Is that correct?
They could carry a few of the zoonotic diseases, such as certain types of tuberculosis or leptospirosis or other things. Those are probably a minor risk for most people. But the big issue really is their ability to carry swine-related diseases. And so that's the major issue. Although, because they can carry things like tuberculosis, they can be an issue for cattle producers, both beef and dairy.
Gotcha. Right on. Yeah, because they're also housed outdoors, right? So that the interaction could be greater. Okay. And one just small question, just trying to build the background before we get into the guts of the conversation, Wayne. And that is, you mentioned that these wild pigs are not indigenous to North America and certainly not to Western Canada. Where did they come from?
Well, we brought them in, basically. During the 1980s and the 1990s, agriculture was in a really tough spot economically. And so they were looking for all kinds of ideas to diversify agriculture. So it was thought that if people could raise these Eurasian wild boars, that might provide a different agricultural income stream. Couple of assumptions to that were that, well, because Manitoba winters and prairie winters in general are fairly severe, that they wouldn't survive outdoors if they ever escaped. Well, that was found to be wrong. They survived, and they survived very well. The issue was that they didn't really produce very good economic gains in terms of feed conversion or carcass cutability and that sort of thing, and they didn't really provide an economic return for the producer. So as a result of that, many producers got out of wild boar raising. Some slaughtered off their herds. Others simply neglected the fence, and these animals escaped. The issue now is that we have the Eurasian wild boar, which most people could recognize by the long, skinny snout and the kind of the razorback appearance. But they can interbreed with other pigs and form a hybrid. So you get the production of domestic pigs, 2 litters a year, 4 to 8 pigs per litter, and the hardiness of the Eurasian wild boar. So you actually get, on the pig side, it's the best of both worlds. For our side, it's the worst of both worlds.
Yeah, yeah, it really is, as you pointed out, the worst of both worlds, because they brought their respective strengths into the hybrid, and that's just made the problem infinitely worse. So yeah, and just very briefly, Wayne, I'll just mention to you um, that I just got back from the island of Sardinia, which is in the Mediterranean just off of Italy, and they have had a serious problem with wild boars there. And I had been there about 8 years ago, and you would see outdoor pigs all over the place, including wild animals. And this time, they embarked on a very aggressive. They brought in the army and a very aggressive depopulation. And I don't know how well it worked, but I do know that when we traveled around where we saw pigs before, we didn't see a single outside pig, not one. But let's get into that for Western Canada now, Wayne. What is going on about controlling these pigs?
Well, let me just give you a little definition that we use in Manitoba too, because I think that's useful. So we call them wild pigs. Other people will call them feral hogs. Some people will call them wild boar. These are all the same animal, but we call them wild pigs because we include any pigs that are outside a fence. So these could involve the Eurasian wild boar. They could involve pot-bellied pigs. They could involve hybrids. Uh, for the purposes of a control program, it's basically any pigs that are not being confined. Definition makes it much simpler than to administer a program.
That makes sense. Thank you for clarifying that, because I keep hearing the different terms and I never quite know what people are meaning by it. So you've just said we're not going to worry what we're meaning by it. We're just referring to any animal that is living in the wild.
Right. And so the other thing that I'd like to make clear is that we're not condemning outdoor pig raising. Um, you sometimes get this debate between, large scale agriculture versus small scale agriculture. I think we need both of those systems. The issue with most of the smallholder raising pigs is that if you can't keep them confined, then they're going to be a constant risk of escaping. And so, really, biosecurity becomes really important for the small scale landholder. And so, we really promote advanced biosecurity in terms of maintaining fences and making sure that the pigs are contained.
How would you maintain biosecurity, i.e., and what I'm really asking about is preventing the transmission of disease from the wild pig population, excuse me, to pigs that are being housed in outdoors, in paddocks, pastures, or whatever. What are you recommending to those producers to prevent the transmission of disease from the wild animals that basically can walk up to the fence line?
Right. There's some really good information that Prairie Swine Center is publishing for smallholders, small scale pig farming. And if folks do a Google on that, they'll find some really good information in terms of feeding practices for small scale pig producers, biosecurity, vaccination, and health requirements. So rather than get into lots of details, I would refer people to that resource.
Is just Google Prairie Swine Center and smallholder pork production or something?
Yes, it's smallholder pig production,
Right.
or small scale pig production, and they'll find it.
Yep.
It's very well done set of videos. So
Oh,
they're,
okay.
they're pretty
Yep.
pretty easy to see. Some really good brochures, and I know that they've been pretty active in trying to promote this information through feed stores and those types of outlets to get the information out to small scale swine producers.
Gotcha. Right on. Okay. So let's now turn our attention to the guts of the story, Wayne, and that is, how do we control this wild pig population?
Yeah, I look at it because I've had a background in animal disease outbreaks. I sort of apply the same principles to this as an animal disease outbreak. And first, so there's kind of a technical side, all of the tools that we have to use, and then there's a non-technical side, which is, engaging people and partnerships. So if we talk about the technical stuff, it's really first of all identifying where the wild pigs are, and so you have to know where they are in order to do anything about it. And so surveillance then becomes one of the key issues in terms of finding out where are these populations, and and then we move on to the control methods after that.
Can you talk to us then? That's I like that approach, and of course, you have an advanced degree in epidemiology, which I'm sure isn't doing you any harm when when you're approaching this particular subject, Wayne. So you're kind of the ideal guy to be in this position. So what are you recommending with respect to surveillance? Is it local people reporting sightings? Is it active surveillance programs that are being carried out in Manitoba? What are we talking about in terms of surveillance?
Well, the answer to that is all of the above. You need all the tools in your tool belt in order to conduct a surveillance program. So one of the things that we did starting last year was that we began a public outreach to get the folks who are traveling around the countryside to report sightings of wild pigs. And that was pretty successful. Last year, I think we had 127 reports of wild pigs, and we put that on a map and we published that on our website. And then we're able to see where the concentrations of wild pig sightings are. So just for reference, our website is www.squealonpigsmb.org. And yeah, and so that was sort of the first tool that gave us an indication of, where to start looking. Then we follow up on that and then talk to the local landowners in that area and ask them if they'd seen any signs of damage or pigs. And so the field follow-up then becomes a question of basically driving around, knocking on doors, trying to figure out where folks might have seen pigs, and trying to gather some of that local knowledge, which is really important, I think, in terms of getting a sense of what the folks on the ground are seeing.
Right, and based on what you're saying, Wayne, the landowners, they don't have to be pork producers to be suffering losses due to the presence of wild pigs in their area or on their farms. So they should be, and it's good to hear that you are including them in the program, because they certainly have a vested interest in your success as well.
As much as we can, we try to encourage the local landowners to become involved, to help monitor the trail cameras that we'll set up in an area, and we'll use cell phone enabled trail cameras so that when a motion is triggered, it sends the picture, and the picture can be sent to the landowner as well as our field manager. So they become intimately involved with the program, and they really are quite appreciative in most cases of being able to get involved and start to manage it. But I would have to say that one of the biggest groups that I think could be affected would be bee farmers, because they've got animals on the land, especially if they feed standing corn. Then we've had reports of pigs right in with the cows.
Wow. I'm looking at your the map on your website right now.
Yeah.
Wayne, thanks for giving me the website. It's really interesting because clearly the wild pig issue is spread basically throughout the whole agricultural area of Manitoba, but it does seem like there's quite a concentration, if I'm reading it right, just to the east of Brandon, kind of along the Trans Canada Highway, actually. So so it not very much down towards the U.S. border. That's kind of interesting. There's a few dots down there, but not a lot.
So we consider the area southeast of Brandon as the Spruce Woods area. Spruce Woods Provincial Park is in that area, and that's where I would think the vast majority of the pigs are. But as you will see, I mean, we do have a few sightings scattered farther north, and we get some sightings in the southeast corner of the province. Those sightings are usually escaped domestic pigs.
And that raises just a very quick question, Wayne. How mobile are these pigs? How far afield will they move? Do they settle into an area and stay relatively close to that area, or will they travel large distances?
That's an interesting question, because the more we learn about pig behavior, I think the better our control methods are going to be. So the females, the breeding females, and the immature pigs stay in a group called a sounder, and they tend to stay in an area so that they need water and they need feed and some sort of shelter. So normally they'll stay in relatively close proximity to some sort of water body, like either a slough or a stream or something along that line. The mature males, the boars, they tend to be in singles. And some people have done tracking on those boars and found that their range is very large. So they'll be off looking for girlfriends all over the country.
Okay, well, let's turn our attention now, Wayne. You've given us some really, really, really good background information. Now, can we turn our attention to the actual control practices that you are involved in or anticipate becoming involved in?
Sure. So just to go through the process, once we get a report, a sighting, then one of our field people will scout the area and talk to the landowners. They will ask to set up a trail camera in the area where they think the pigs are, and they'll start to set out some bait. Usually that's fermented corn or jello powder. And so the pigs are attracted to that, but things like deer and other animals generally aren't. Once we get pigs coming to an area, then we'll set up a trap. And there's two different types of traps. There's the steel corral panel type traps with wire mesh on them, and they have a drop gate usually. And then there's another net-based ring trap. So it looks like a volleyball net in a big ring. And those are anchored with T-posts around the perimeter of it. And then the the idea is that you roll up the net and you bait the inside, and then once pigs get used to coming to it, you drop the net, and then they will push their nose under the net, and then they can't get out again. Those are the two major types of traps that people have used.
Okay. What, obviously, I think the question is going to be on a lot of people's minds. What about hunting?
Yeah, that's a bit of a mixed review on hunting. Some people, I think, initially thought that hunting, you could hunt your way out of it. What ends up happening is that if you've got a group of pigs and you get 3 or 4 of them, the rest of them will just scatter, and they'll be much, much harder to find next time. They won't come out during the day. They'll stay hidden until nightfall. You tend to disperse the group, so it's not usually a good idea to encourage hunting. I think the one exception would be for those lone males that are traveling around the country. They might be controlled through some hunting, but again, it's a bit of a mixed review. It's not going to be the solution for sure.
Yeah, it's a tough problem. I mean, it's just it's been around for a while. It's been around. I mean, Manitoba or Western Canada is certainly not the only place that's trying to deal with wild pig population. Many U.S. states, I know we read a great deal about it in Texas, for example, where they apparently have very, very large numbers of wild pigs. So it's a very widespread problem. So I'm sure people are watching what you folks are doing with a great deal of interest. Before we start winding up our conversation, Wayne, were there any other messages you had for our listeners today?
Yeah, I think some of the issues that we encounter in Manitoba are the technical issues are related to, winter conditions. And so we've learned a lot from our colleagues in the US in terms of wild pig control, but we've got a number of issues that we need to solve because of snow and cold weather and poor cell service and those types of things. So we're working on that. But I think the big thing that I would like to point out is that, you can do all of these technical things, but unless you actually have folks who will collaborate with you and work with you, you can have the best technical services in the world, and they're not going to be successful. So communications and building partnerships becomes really the integral part of a wild pig control program.
Good. And so any, let's say, messages before we move into our final 3 questions that I talked to you about earlier, Wayne, any sort of general take-home messages you'd like to emphasize with our listeners today?
Yeah, I think I just want to recognize that wild pigs are an invasive species. They don't belong on our landscape. And so we don't want to encourage people to either farm them or raise them for hunt purposes. They just don't belong here. I think from the experiences that we've seen, especially in the southern states, you need to take control measures very quickly and very aggressively. If you wait until a problem starts to get large, then you're way behind. It's been estimated that you have to remove up to 70% of a pig population in order just to maintain it at the same level. So that number sticks in my head as we really have to get after this. And then the last point that I would make is that building that coalition of stakeholders, so not just government agencies, but non-government agencies, producer groups, wildlife groups, environmental groups. You have to bring all of those folks into the same umbrella, if you will, to focus on this one issue, and everybody can play a part. And it's not going to be solved by one group doing one thing.
Right. Good point. That's a great point to finish up on. And I'd like to just at the same time, one of my take home messages from what I've heard from you, Wayne, is the website, which, as you mentioned, is squealonpigsmb, as in Manitoba.org. And as an example, you've got some wonderful photographs here, which shows what the footprints look like. It shows what scat looks like. It shows what their nests look like, and also shows what is the result of their rooting behavior. So it would be pretty easy for somebody who has absolutely no familiarity with pigs whatsoever to be able to identify whether wild pigs have been in their area. So that's a great website. Thanks very much for that.
It's time for our famous three.
So let's move on to our final three questions, Wayne. And the first question that I have for you is with respect to uh, references that you have used, and sort of a favorite book that you would have that's related to pigs that you would like to share with our listeners today.
Sure. Well, when I was working for the federal and provincial governments, I had roles in enforcing disease control measures and trying to stamp out disease outbreaks and things like that. And so I picked up a book. It's not really about swine particularly, but it's about people who have to solve difficult or what they call wicked problems. And how do you do that when the answers aren't easy? And it's called The Regulatory Craft, Controlling Risks, Solving Problems, and Managing Compliance. And it's by a fellow by the name of Malcolm Sparrow. Malcolm Sparrow came from the UK, and he was on a number of task forces trying to solve issues related to drug running and all kinds of things that are really hard problems. And the thing I got out of his book was that he would come up with out of the box solutions that involved a lot of collaboration and a lot of building stakeholder involvement. And it was a good book for me to read at the time, and some of the lessons have really stuck with me.
Great. And what was the name of that book again, please?
It's called The Regulatory Craft by Malcolm Sparrow. Sparrow isn't the bird yet.
Right. And my second question for you is, do you have a favorite book that's not related to pigs? That just it can be fiction, nonfiction, reference, whatever.
Yeah, this again was it's sort of one of the it's not really light reading, but it was a book that made an influence on me as I was working in various roles, and it's called Leading at a Higher Level by Ken Blanchard. So he goes through how do you develop leadership skills to manage change, especially when you may not have direct oversight over other people in that organization. So again, it sort of works on the coalition building, being a leader without necessarily having line authority. So it really helps if you're trying to build a group to accomplish a task, if you're trying to lead a volunteer organization, all of those types of things. It helps to put the different perspectives in order so that you can build a team that's actually going to do something and solve the problem.
Right on. Great. And my final question for you then, Wayne, is and this a question I like. I think it's a really good one for young people who are either still getting their education or in the early stages of their career. what would you say are the characteristics that set apart the leaders in your field?
Um, I think good leaders have a few traits. I think be curious. Try to learn as much as you can about a new issue and try to understand other people's points of view. And so be curious and be respectful. I mean, I think in today's world, respect is something that's sometimes in short supply. And so, can we understand other folks' point of view, even if we don't like it or don't agree with it, and see where they're coming from? And then finally, I think I would say be learning continually. Try to, I tell people I try to learn one new thing every day, but sometimes I have to forget something to learn something new.
Right. Yeah. 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 Our craniums only have so much capacity, Wayne,
Yeah,
right?
my hard disk is full, I'm afraid. So
There you go. Okay. Well, on that note, I think that's a great comment that we can wrap things up on today. Thank you, sir, so very much. I've been speaking with Dr. Wayne Lees, who's coordinator with the Squeal on Pigs Manitoba program, dealing with the One Health approach to the management and control of wild pig population in Manitoba. Wayne, thank you so very much. It's been a real pleasure learning from you today.
yeah, thank you, John.